To be with you today. We're going to cover what we believe is a pretty important topic, and hopefully, obviously, by your attendance and participation today, you feel the same way. Today, we're going to spend some time focusing in on essentially how to mitigate the risk of generative AI and how you can secure your data while empowering your workforce. So before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you have any specific questions you'd like to ask during the session, feel free to enter those into either, there's a couple of different places you can enter it into the question section, or you can enter those into the chat. I will be monitoring both, or you can wait until the conclusion of the session and we will open it up for Q&A. So we'll answer any live questions and or any of the questions or chats that are entered. We'll do those at the end of today's session. Joining us today and leading the discussion, we've got two specific individuals, Tyler Croak, who is a principal cybersecurity strategist, as well as Chris King, who is a senior sales engineer. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Tyler, for introductions, and away we go.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So my name is Tyler Croak, and I'm a principal cybersecurity strategist here at Lookout. I'm a long-time security practitioner, and I'm actually a part of the threat intelligence team here. I also work on broader strategic initiatives at Lookout, and I act as the threat intelligence services lead for our mobile digital forensic investigations unit. I'm joined here today by Chris King. Chris, how about you give a quick introduction and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Let me find the right button. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yep, I'm Chris King. I'm part of the Digital Guardian part of Fortra. I've been with Digital Guardian for 17 years. So I've been in the space for a while. I'm the guy who actually designs the demos for all the other SEs, and I do webinars. But I'm pretty much into the data security space. We just announced a new product with Lookout called DGSSE, which we'll talk a little about today. That's it. Good, man.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Much appreciated for the intro. So let's kind of cover this agenda first, and then we'll jump right into the topic content today. So the first thing we're going to do is briefly go over the history of artificial intelligence and give some generative AI and ChatGPT definitions. We'll then discuss how data collection when using these tools generally works and provide an example with the most commonly used tool that's out there right now, ChatGPT. We'll then discuss common use cases for the tool, and then I'm going to spend some time going over some of the benefits and dangers of these tools and provide some real world sort of examples. And during this section, I'm going to cover three primary buckets of risks: internal risks, external facing risks, and other risks that exist when using AI. And then I'm going to hand it over to Chris to discuss a three-step approach to enabling safe use of these tools. And lastly, we'll conclude by providing some key takeaways. So I'm going to bring up this chart primarily to show you the topic of artificial intelligence has been around for quite some time. AI is not new. Alan Turing gave an early lecture in 1947, and he said, in quote, "What we want is a machine that can learn from experience." And he also said the possibility of letting the machine alter its own instructions provides the mechanism for this. He then introduced many central concepts of artificial intelligence in a report in 1948 titled Intelligent Machinery. The earliest successful AI program that we saw was written in 1951 by Christopher Strachey, and it focused on the game of checkers. We then saw demonstrations of machine learning that was published in 1952. And in the 1960s, we saw early AI programs like ELIZA, which simulated human therapists, and basic English conversation. Through the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, we saw waves of advancement and setbacks in artificial intelligence. Many of those setbacks were financial related. Over 300 AI companies were shut down or had gone bankrupt by the end of 1993. And from 1993 to 2011, the field began to achieve some of its original goals. Some of this related to, increasing computing power and focusing on very isolated problems. Between 2011 and 2020, there were significant advancements in computing and advanced machine learning techniques that became an enabler for where we're really at today. One of those was the transformer architecture that was proposed by Google researchers in 2017. And that led to the scaling and development of large language models exhibiting human-like traits of reasoning, cognition, and creativity. Use of the word the AI era is said to really have begun around 2022, early 2023, with the public release of scaled large language models like ChatGPT. So, it's impossible to cover the whole history of AI here. You could spend an entire presentation focusing just on that. So I'm going to move on to our next slide. So let's cover some basic definitions here. Most people on this call may already know this, but just in case, I want to briefly cover it. So what does GPT and ChatGPT actually stand for? Generative refers to the model's ability to generate text that's coherent and meaningful. Pre-trained means that GPT is initially trained on a large amount of data from the internet. And it helps the model learn things like facts to make it knowledgeable about a wide range of topics. And lastly, transformative excels at understanding context and relationships between words. And of course, the obvious thing here is the word generative in GenAI, which means it can generate original responses from your textual inquiry. So this is a really fascinating slide. When you're looking at other software products, I think it's important to recognize just how quickly ChatGPT exploded as far as use goes. So if you look on the left here, you'll see a pretty popular service called Uber, right? Or it's on the right, actually. So if you look on the right, you'll see Uber, and everyone here has used this at some point in their time when they're traveling. It took them 70 months to reach 100 million users. ChatGPT, in comparison, took 2 months. So this service is now estimated to have over 200 million monthly users, which is, to me, incredible. So I'm going to transition a little bit now and talk about data collection and how data is used when you sign up to use these tools. I think when these products first came out, there was a significant fear from most organizations about how data was actually being collected and being used by these services. So a large amount of organizations simply took the approach of just blocking employees from being able to access these tools. That was the initial fear wave that we saw when these tools came out. So if you want to read in-depth details about what information is actually shared by default when using these products, I'm going to always refer you to a product's privacy policy. But at a high level, here's some of the information that is shared with ChatGPT as an example. Information like your email address, device, IP, and location, conversation history, and by default, any information used in ChatGPT prompts can be used to train their model. So by default, that is turned on. And when I say that, it's there if you've created an account and you sign on and you start using the service. This is all, you could see chat training and history on the right there is completely turned on. So this is something you have to manually shut off or have a means of control of turning this off if you don't want it turned on. So I highlighted a couple of other areas in the privacy policy that were a bit concerning for me, such as the collection of personal info to improve the services and conduct research. And if I look at this description, it seems like really broad. So I think most organizations need to be mindful that any information that you might be entering into these interfaces could be in a public domain. And this is why we'll be reviewing and honing in on our generative AI adoption plan a little bit later in the talk today to enable the safe use of these tools. So I'm just going to put all of these up here on the screen here. So when you think about what I shared previously, you may think to yourself, well, blocking use of these tools is the right thing for me to do. And that might be true for some organizations, but I don't think that approach is going to work long term. There's lots of legitimate reasons to enable use of these tools within the workforce. You have to think about generative AI as really being a potential force multiplier for most organizations, their workers, and their operational efficiency. I provided a bunch of columns here on common use cases. I'm not going to cover all of them. You can see this here. And this doesn't even include all of them, right? Like you could spend a whole deck just talking about potential use cases. I use ChatGPT on pretty much a daily basis. One example for me, and not just ChatGPT, by the way, I use other LLMs out there. But one example for me that I use and other LLM tools is for threat intelligence, because I'm in threat intelligence. So I use it for threat intelligence trend report analysis. So this is a great common use case for me. I want to take a lot of different reports, do an analysis on all of them, give me the what's the same and what's different between these reports. And to me, that's really useful. If I do that manually, it takes me a lot of time. So again, it's a time saver, operational efficiency increase. But regardless of your industry, there's likely going to be a way to leverage these tools to make you more productive. And that's why I think we're seeing such rapid and widespread adoption overall. Okay, so I think with the previous slide, I've already kind of covered some of the benefits of using these tools, but I've categorized them here for you to see. So let's focus on some of the risks and let's categorize these risks into the 3 buckets that I mentioned earlier. So on this slide, I've covered 2 of these categories. I'm going to talk about the third as well, but I consider the risks a general category of risks and insider risks. For general risks, I think it's important to understand that you can't expect 100% factual information to be provided to you. I personally believe one of the major general risks is that these systems actually have the possibility to rapidly help spread disinformation. Let me give you a perfect example of this. I use GPT to give exact examples of known breaches where companies had leveraged these sort of tools and leaked sensitive data. And this is going to be in one of the future slides that I showed you. It reported a bunch of companies where employees had leaked sensitive data that was not accurate. I had to fact check all of it. And that's why they had these sort of warnings in here, right? And it was like very detailed analogies too, which was really concerning to me. They would say the exact description of what the leak was and then the impact, and none of it was actually factual. So I think disinformation through these sort of tools is increasingly alarming. I also think that employees and even students this is another example, I think employees and students may begin over-relying on these tools, and this may inhibit things like natural learning processes. So that's the first general category of risks. I think there's lots of other general risks too, but those are 2 that I wanted to focus on. As far as internal risks go, if employees are not educated on use of these tools, there's the possibility that they may share sensitive information in these systems. So this could include things like intellectual property, source code, other sensitive organization information. And there's a possibility to expose the company's PII when an employee uses these tools, depending on what data they're sharing with it, and whether or not they're inadvertently or intentionally sharing this data. It represents insider risk. So ultimately, the use of these tools can lead organizations to various compliance violations because of this. All right. So you remember I mentioned this earlier example where I used GPT to bring up these real world application examples. Only one of them was true, and then I dug for the other ones because the other ones were not actually accurate. So the first one we have here, this is a good real world example use case that maybe others have already heard of, but the biggest example is the Samsung one, which is where employees inadvertently leak confidential company data that included source code for a semiconductor database, and they shared a recording of an internal meeting and converted it into notes for a presentation. We've also seen a couple other examples. There's a Microsoft example where security researchers published a bucket of open source training data on GitHub and exposed about, I think it was 38 terabytes of additional private data. And then lastly, there was an instance where Amazon employees were warned not to share Amazon confidential information because they detected instances of responses from ChatGPT where internal Amazon data was referenced. So, if you scour the internet for what's actually out there, you'll find the example with Samsung. You'll find these other examples, but I guarantee you there's so many other examples that are simply just not reported where people have done this. So again, there's an increase here of internal risk. So I mentioned there's 3 buckets. The other bucket I want to mention is external risks. So that's that third category. Much of the remainder of our talk track really is going to focus on defensive and protective measures for mitigating the category of insider risks. But I think it's worth briefly talking about how generative AI is actually being leveraged by attackers. In 2023, we didn't really see these tools being used by attackers for carrying out a whole lot of attacks. So threat actors saw the potential here as a force multiplier, like everyone else did, and in primarily these particular areas. But if you look at some of the actual annual threat reports that came out in early 2024 by leading incident response organizations, you'll see most of them indicate that they didn't really see a whole lot of activity from these threat actor groups in 2023. So it was almost like this was for attackers, this was like a research phase for them. It's how are we going to use and operationalize generative AI in future attacks? So then in 2024, in February, we saw a Microsoft article that came out and showcased several different nation and non-nation state threat actors beginning to use these tools for a variety of use cases. And I've included a link in this article to this article in the presentation. So primarily, we see threat actors in 2024 leveraging generative AI for research purposes, vulnerability research, enhancing reconnaissance operations, enhancing scripting tasks, helping enable social engineering and phishing campaigns, which is something we definitely expected to occur. And then, of course, aiding in code development for detection evasion. Being able to do this type of work at scale through these tools can be quite helpful. So this area overall is advancing quite rapidly. Similar to other organizations, Lookout is further investigating these sort of external risks and determining what measures we can put in place to detect and protect against attacks that are leveraging generative AI tools. So at this point in time, I feel like we covered a lot of material. I want to transition this over to Chris, who's going to review with you a 3-step approach to adopting use of these tools within your organization and provide you with some demonstrations that showcase how we can safeguard and enable customers when using these tools. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and pass this over in a second here. Okay, give me 1 second. And go ahead, Chris, you should be able to share.
I don't see it yet.
1 second. There you go.
Hang on.
Yep.
Let me know when you see my PowerPoint.
Got it.
Good. So thank you for sending this over. So as Tyler mentioned, this is a big problem, right? I get a lot of calls. I'm doing a lot of demos with clients because this is a huge use case, right? Who's going to these Gen AI sites, Chat, Gemini, Claude, what have you, and then what are they doing with what are they asking? And again, some clients are like, listen, I want you just to block it. I don't want them to go there. And some clients are like, okay, I don't want them sending any sensitive data out the door via, the website. So the first part, and this is actually the hardest part I feel about this technology, is identifying what sensitive data is. All right. So again, if you talk about source code, and again, that's the first use case that we work on all the time, is clients are afraid of, again, we're a software company, Fortra, right? There's no, what would happen if somebody took, one of our products, source code, and said, hey, Chat, make this better, and it will do it. It does a great job. Trust me, it does a great job. Hey, document this for me. Do basically take the load off, right, of what I'm doing per day, writing code, documenting code, testing code. It can do all that for you. So, and again, it keeps that data. They say it doesn't, but it does, right? Because it uses it, inside. So that's the number one use case. Is the execs are like, I want to prevent source code, intellectual property, PII, PCI data from getting into these sites. That's the number one use case. So back again, how do you solve this problem? There's 2 ways. One of them is we have a data protection endpoint agent that can see where you go. All right, so it sees you go to Chat, and it sees you upload a file. All right, so you can take some source code in Chat and say, hey, here's a Python script, here's some C# code, make this better. You just upload the file, it chews on it, sends you a version back, you copy it, put it back in your file, and compile it and go. Beautiful. So they want to prevent that, right? Pasting the data. So if I open up the doc, if I can't upload it, I can cut the file from my IDE and paste it into Chat and say, make this better. They want to prevent that too. And the other one is actually typing the like credit card numbers and stuff like that, and they do what's called posting the data. So the first part, and again, this to me is the hardest part, is identifying what is sensitive data, right? If it's source code, it's not just source code, it's company source code, it's my product source code, right? So you have to distinguish between IP data that's mine, that's sensitive, and just regular source code, right? PCI PII, that's kind of easy, right? Because you can do regular expressions and keywords and validation on that. But the source code is the hardest one, because what is source code? Is it how do I identify sensitive source code? Is it based on keywords, right? Is it some kind of machine learning that says, do some magic on that file and say that's source code? But that's not good enough. It has to be sensitive source code, right? So the way we do it is we do it based on where it comes from, and I'll get into that in a second. So again, if we do the crawl, walk, run, right? Discover, what is sensitive data, and again, I mentioned before, that's the number one hardest part. Where it's going is easy. What sites are going, that's easy. What users, that's all easy to do, and you can do that again via an endpoint agent, or you could do it via a forward proxy. All right, so the CASB inline vendors can say, hey, maybe you can't go to that site, or maybe if you do go to the site and you paste some data or upload some data, I can block it, right? And again, you can block, right, it from getting up there if you want, right? And then again, at the end of the day, we want to restrict this. We want to report on it. So as I mentioned before, our approach is not content for source code. That's hard to do. Keywords, regular expressions, machine learning, very hard to distinguish. Is that source code? But the harder part is it sensitive source code? Again, company data, like the Samsung, firmware data, or is it, one of our products data versus just regular old source code? So again, we do that based on where it comes from. So what we do is we say, okay, most developers use, GitHub or specific places to store their source code. And what you have to do is you have to tell us, where is that source code? Where is those repositories that they're going to put that data? Because when they pull that data down, then we can actually classify it, tag it. And then when they try to put it back somewhere they shouldn't, or upload it, email, print, cut, paste, copy, we can prevent that, right? So here's in our console where you would define these, in this case, GitHub, right? These repository URLs. So anything you put in this list, and again, companies know this, right? So developers, managers, they know where the sensitive data repositories are. So you have to tell us. And if you tell us, if you pull data or do a git clone from those repositories, we can actually tag the files. And then if you try to cut and paste, upload, take the file, zip it, encrypt it, whatever, we still retain the tag, and therefore we can block it from going someplace it shouldn't. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We can go through this. So here's a Discover report, just in general, who's doing what, right? So upload, right? Network operations just going there, pasting data, downloading data, uploading data. These are the sites in the middle. So we have a content pack just for generative AI. So we've got over 150 sites that we've labeled as GenAI sites. And this is just a report and this is a small data set, 7 distinct computers that are sending data to these sites, right? When I say sending the data, they're uploading, they're just going there, they're pasting, downloading, right, from those sites. Here's a report. Here's actually the rules that make up that policy pack, right? Just NetOps. NetOps is just going to the site. ADE, Application Data Exchange. So they're pasting data into these sites. Again, any data or classified data. Classified data would be one of those source code documents that we've deemed classified based on where it came from, right? Uploading, same way, right? So here's an example of me. On the left-hand side, there's the source code. I'm gonna just try to upload it, right? I'm gonna upload it to Gemini, right? Make this code better. And here's Digital Guardian stopping in, saying, hey, Chris, now again, I could prevent this from happening, block it, and then you'd see a, just an abort, not a continue. I could ask you for a justification. I could put a link to security awareness training if that's what you want to do for the users. But at the end of the day, we can see this happen and prompt the user for a justification, or in this case, you can still do it if you want, because this prompt will let you continue, but I will know you did it, right? Or you could just block it. Here's me putting an image, right? And actually, no, this is me uploading. This is me uploading a file into Gemini. So again, what you do is you take your file, your Python script, you say, hey, make this better, and you just, grab it, throw it into Gemini, and it does it. This will actually, this is preventing me, and this is a block, by the way. The other one was a warning because it can still continue, but this is actually a block, so you can't do it. Here's me pasting data. So again, I'm trying to get the data. I'm trying to make this code better. I try to upload it. So I'm just going to cut it, and then paste it in there. Can you make this more efficient? And it comes back and says, no. Actually, no, it asks for a justification. So I'm just trying to go through the different prompts. I could have blocked it, but in this case, give me a justification of why I want to do this. Hit continue, it will do it. Right. So it's up to the client what they want it, the action to be, the reaction to be when users are doing this. So that's all I got. Some takeaways. So again, make sure your organization, number one, has that visibility into what users are doing. Right. So what are they doing with these sites? Right. Because again, at the end of the day, if you don't know what they're doing, you're in the dark, right? So are they going to these sites? Are they uploading data, pasting data, posting data to these sites? If they are, at least we can actually see it, right? We can see them do it. Then you can say, okay, now what's going on, right? So who are the users? Are they developers? Are they in HR or whatever? Should we exempt them from the policy? Because at the end of the day, I want to block the user from doing this, because again, I'm trying to protect my intellectual property. Crawl, walk, run, of course, is the old approach of saying, let's see them do it. And then again, we can do soft prompts at the beginning, like these, saying, give me a justification. Again, if this happens to me, I'm going to say, whoa, right? Something's happening. My company knows I'm doing something bad, right? And I'll probably abort and probably not do it again, right? It all depends on who the user is. If I want to hit some justification, hit continue, we're going to record that too, and somebody from IT can call me and say, hey, Chris, what are you doing, right? We have the ability, Digital Guardian has that ability to provide that visibility, right, into the upload, email, post, and print. But as I mentioned before, the biggest part, or the biggest differentiator between us and a lot of the vendors out there when it comes to DLP, is the ability to classify data based on where it comes from, right? Because all source code is not created equal. Again, even though it is source code, it's not, it could be company source code, the next gen firmware for my phone, or the next product we're releasing in our suite. You don't want that data ending up in these large language models. That's all I got, unless you guys have any questions.
No, that's great. That's great, Chris. So as you guys can see, everyone on the call who's joined us today, really you've got to take steps to enable that crawl, walk, and run approach, right? And you want people to be able to use these tools, but you also want to make sure that you're protecting your company against sensitive data from getting potentially leaked, right? So as we walk through the risks, both the insider risks, the external risks, we're hoping that you take away from this talk today some new information and gain some insight that you can take back to your company and consider implementing these kind of controls to ensure that the adoption when leveraging generative AI tools is successful and that you're on a better path when leveraging these tools. So thanks for joining us today. Great to be here with you all. If there's any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll answer them at this time.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Tyler. And for the audience, we will ensure that the presentation, it has been recorded, so it will be posted on a website that you can view at a later date. And we'll also put the presentation materials into a PDF, and we'll make that accessible as well. So if you have any questions between now and then, feel free to reach out, and you should be receiving some correspondence from us with respect to the presentation. So with that, if there's no questions at this time, we sincerely appreciate your time today. Hopefully it was productive, and have a great week. With that, we'll go ahead and conclude the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.